Between 1999 to 2001, a 12-year-old girl would vanish in Missouri while babysitting, and a 14-year-old girl would vanish in Texas after skipping school. Decades have passed without answers for these families, and those involved are still walking our streets.
Still no answers.
9 years ago today.
What happened to these two young children?
Remains a mystery.
Urgent story unfolding right now. Who is missing? An unsolved murder.
Twelve-year-old Heather Kullorn was born on March 9th of 1987 to her mother Christine. She also had a brother named Matthew. Heather attended Blow Middle School, located in St. Louis, Missouri, where she lived with her 34-year-old mother, 14-year-old brother, and a Cocker Spaniel named Daisy. Heather was also diabetic and required 2 shots of insulin a day to live. She was described as a good girl who was easygoing and would tell you what she thought of you in a minute. She liked attention and made sure that she got it. And during a home beauty experiment, Heather attempted to pluck her eyebrows, but ended up shaving both of them off entirely, as pictured here. She loved to wrestle with her uncles and cousins and was thrilled by the Mr. Freeze ride at Six Flags in St. Louis. She had a season's pass and had visited twice that year. In 1999, Heather had completed 6th grade, but had to repeat the year after missing several weeks due to doctors figuring out medical issues around her health, which led to her eventually being diagnosed with diabetes. She was said to be boisterous, described as 12 going on 30. She called herself Da Bomb and loved playing school with her younger cousins. In July of 1999, Heather was staying with friends of her mother, named Dana Madden and Christopher Herbert, to help them watch their 2-month-old baby. The apartment was located on the 1600 block of Yale Avenue in the Richmond Heights neighborhood of St. Louis. On the evening of July 14th of 1999, Dana went to work at a local 7-Eleven around 10 p.m., and Christopher went out to take a friend home. This left Heather alone in the apartment with the baby. Around 2 a.m., which was now July 15th, a neighbor walking his dog recalled seeing an unidentified male carrying a small child in his arms. A small child around Heather's age out of an apartment there, actually. The child's upper body was said to be covered by a comforter, they weren't wearing shoes, and they appeared to be sleeping. According to Christopher, he would arrive home around 4 a.m. to find his infant daughter alone and Heather missing. He would then call Dana, who would then call the police. By 5 a.m., the major case squad was activated and more than 24 officers were on the scene. Dana would later discover that a white comforter with a floral pattern on it was actually missing from the apartment. A small amount of blood linked to Heather was also found inside of the apartment. Authorities saying, quote, "We went inside the apartment and there was blood on the couch. There was blood on a wash rag that was laying by the couch. There was blood on some pillows that had been stuffed behind a trash can. Heather's diabetic medication was still there on the table. Actually, there was blood smeared quite a few places there. When we saw she didn't have her diabetic medication, we figured that something very tragic had happened. We knew she could not survive without it." End quote. Blood would also be located on the outside of the apartment, but it would later be determined to be a neighbor's blood who had been bitten by a dog. But that blood inside of the apartment was identified as Heather's blood. And it's noted as a small amount of blood, but to me that sounds like quite a large amount of blood. Blood on the couch, a wash rag, and then hidden pillows. That's very strange. And to me, that doesn't sound like a outside perpetrator coming in and attacking this little girl and then kidnapping her. Why would they then go and hide pillows? Why would they go and get a wash rag and seemingly maybe put it on a wound? It makes me wonder if it was just that, or if maybe it was one of the baby's like burp cloths of some sort that ended up just getting blood on it from, residual spray of some sort. We don't have all those little details, but it's very concerning to me that there is this blood in these certain places. It makes me feel like if this was just an outside perpetrator coming in to do something to this little girl, why would they go to those extra methods to move those pillows, for example? And I say that because during Heather's disappearance, Dana was at work. She has an alibi. However, her partner Christopher doesn't. He would end up giving conflicting stories about his whereabouts around that time when Heather disappeared. From the very beginning, authorities also said that there was very little cooperation from those on the scene to try to help find Heather, recalling that People were acting odd, they had no eye contact, they didn't want to participate in any interviews, and they were just trying to avoid everything and wanting to leave the scene. Who those people were, they didn't name names, but you can speculate. After a few weeks, the major case squad handed the case over to the Richmond Heights Police Department, and Detective Mike Brown became the lead detective in the search for Heather. With her medical condition, there was an incredible amount of pressure and urgency to find her. Day after day, authorities were canvassing the neighborhood in search for new clues and interviewing the family, friends, and acquaintances. There were said to be occasions where investigators felt like the case was very close to being solved. However, they just could not get sufficient enough evidence to pin it on a certain person or individuals. But due to all of the evidence and the circumstances, authorities pretty much came to the conclusion that Heather had been met by foul play, and her family would watch from the living room as the news reported on her disappearance with no answers flowing in. But Heather had a close-knit community around her. At least 4 of her aunts and uncles lived within several blocks of her home, as well as a dozen or so cousins, in-laws, and children of cousins. A picture of Heather would be taped on the brick front of the apartment on a postboard reading, quote, "We all love you, Heather, and miss you. Please return soon." End quote. By August, a crew of the FBI would actually fly in to go over case files and speak with the local authorities. The team would end up giving the local investigators suggestions. They revisited the crime scene and said that they'd provide a formal report by the following month. This report was also going to provide authorities with a profile of the kind of person who would have most likely done something to Heather. Police believed that Heather had been attacked and abducted by somebody that she knew. They shifted their investigation around a methamphetamine ring after methamphetamine paraphernalia was found in the basement of the apartment that Heather had been staying at. One theory at the time being that Heather may have witnessed some kind of illegal drug activity in the apartment's garage. She was then abducted and murdered as a result. Over the years, more than 500 leads have been followed in an attempt to solve this case and lead those who are responsible to justice. Dana, however, denied knowing anything about paraphernalia in her home. Investigators also looked into evidence of a red BMW being involved in Heather's disappearance. However, there wasn't any other information revolving around that I could find. Another interesting theory that was mentioned online is that a predator was active in the St. Louis area around the time of Heather's disappearance, actually during decades surrounding her disappearance. 6 years prior, on November 18th of 1993, 9-year-old Angie Hausman disappeared on her way home from school. She was a 4th grader who lived in the St. Anne neighborhood of St. Louis. She would last be seen walking from her school bus at her bus stop, which was just 8 houses down from her home. 9 days after her disappearance, Angie's body was horrifically discovered by a deer hunter, and she was found tied to a tree in the August A. Bush Memorial Conservation Area in St. Charles County, a remote area near St. Louis. Little Angie was described as being naked, partially covered in snow. Her head was wrapped in duct tape, and she was handcuffed and bound to a tree. Evidence suggested that she had been starved, tortured, and essayed. Her autopsy also revealed her cause of death was hypothermia, meaning Angie had been left tied to that tree, struggling to get free as she slowly died from the elements. It's just absolutely horrific. I can't imagine how lonely this little girl must have been and how scared she must have been. 9 years old. After everything that had happened to her, just left there to die in the wilderness. It's horrific. And it would be years before answers would come. Years where her attacker and killer was walking free among the public and reoffending. 25 years would actually pass before crime lab experts would test DNA that was found on the pink lace trim of her underwear, given DNA advancements had improved by then. But a search of a national database called the Combined DNA Index System would lead to a 61-year-old man named Earl Webster Cox matching the DNA. It would turn out that Earl lived just 3 blocks from Angie's school at the time of her disappearance. But killing Angie turned out to not be his first offense. In 1975, Earl joined the Air Force only to be dishonorably discharged from sex offenses involving 4 children while stationed in Germany. He was court-martialed in 1980 and served 8 years at Fort Leavenworth. At the time of Angie's disappearance, Earl had moved back to Missouri after a second arrest for child abuse in 1992. A year later, he abducted, brutally attacked, and killed 9-year-old Angie. For the next decade, it's unknown what he was up to, but in 2003, he'd plead guilty to trying to entice a minor across state lines for sexual activity and to charges for the 45,000 images of CSAM FBI agents found on his home computer. And then after all of that, it wouldn't be until 2012 until the courts would certify that Earl was a dangerous sexual predator, and he would then be committed indefinitely to federal custody under the Adam Walsh Child Protection Act. It wouldn't be until 7 years after that he would be identified in Angie's murder. He would then finally be charged with first-degree kidnapping, first-degree murder, and sodomy in Angie's case. That's over 40 years that this man was out attacking children. It's ridiculous. But all of that is to say that there were evil individuals lurking free and roaming around the area that Heather lived in around the time of her disappearance. I'm not sure what Earl's alibi was at the time of Heather's disappearance, but who's to say that him or someone like him wasn't lurking around, possibly stalking Heather, knowing that these adults were leaving her alone there with a 2-month-old baby. They could have just been parked on the street and watched as Christopher had left and then went and abducted Heather. No, I think it's definitely a possibility as well. In April of 2000, Heather's mother would end up being arrested after a verbal confrontation with Dana. She believed that both Dana and Christopher knew more about her daughter's disappearance than they were saying. And after all of the trauma that this family had went through with Heather disappearing, for one reason or another, neighbors began accusing Heather's family of killing her for insurance money and began making rumors and asking if that methamphetamine equipment that was found in Dana and Christopher's apartment complex had actually been moved to Heather's family's home. Just completely disrespectful. When Christine resumed her job at the local 7-Eleven as a manager there, not even work was an escape for her. Everyone was constantly asking her about her daughter's disappearance to the point that she had to quit her job. But it didn't stop there. At 1:42 a.m. one day, a message was left on Christine's phone by a man who said, quote, "Hello, I've got Heather right here. She'd like to talk to you." End quote. It was just another hoax to upset the family. Why would you call the family and pretend to have abducted them? It's disgusting, and those people should be charged for things like that. That's not a prank. That's so fucked up. And as the years would pass on, Heather's family would continue to celebrate her birthday year after year with no answers. In March of 2002, human remains would end up being found nearby that did not match Heather. Meanwhile, police say that they have a suspect that they have not publicly identified. Sadly, on December 16th of 2017, Heather's mother would pass away without answers. In her obituary, Heather is listed as a survivor. And even in retirement, Detective Mike Brown still thinks about Heather and in ways her case could be solved. There are so many people who have not forgotten this little girl, and let's continue adding on to the amount of people who know about Heather's case so that it doesn't be forgotten about. Let's not let little Heather be forgotten. Heather Kullorn is described as a white female with brown hair and hazel eyes, standing around 4 foot 10 inches tall and 87 pounds at the time of her disappearance. She had a birthmark on her inner right thigh and multiple piercings in her ears. She had shaved her eyebrows prior to her disappearance. She was a diabetic that required daily insulin injections to regulate her condition and needed to test her blood sugar 4 times a day. She was last seen wearing green plaid shorts and a dark blue cutoff t-shirt with an emblem. 14-year-old Sarah Elizabeth Kinslow was born June 14th of 1986 to her mother Louise and her father John. At the time, Sarah was in a relationship with an 18-year-old man named Curtis Wayne Bell, who lived in Quinlan, Texas. Although I would not like to call this a relationship, I don't think it's appropriate whatsoever that an 18-year-old is dating a 14-year-old. That age gap is a no-no for me. That is gross. That is grooming. And due to all of that, and I'm sure more, her mother Louise wasn't allowing Sarah to date this man. Completely understandably, I would also not be allowing my 14-year-old child to be dating an 18-year-old. On May 7th of 2001, around 7:20 a.m., Sarah's father would drop her off at Greenville Middle School, located in Greenville, Texas. But as the afternoon came, Sarah didn't return home as usual. And due to this, her family would end up finding out that she had not been at school all day. Which to me makes me wonder, why weren't her parents contacted if she didn't show up at school? This is 2001, but still, I feel like the parents should be contacted when their children don't show up for classes. It would turn out that after speaking to some of Sarah's close friends, The teens had actually planned to all skip school together that day. The plan was for Sarah and her friends to meet up at Eastmount Cemetery, yet Sarah never showed up there. That information led Louise to contact the police and report her daughter missing. Once the investigation launched, authorities brought a tracking canine to Greenville Middle School. The dog ended up being able to track Sarah's scent 2 blocks away from the school, but the scent ended in the middle of the street, which led authorities to believe that Sarah most likely got into a vehicle at that point. This information would be further supported when a witness came forward claiming to have seen Sarah in an older model light blue Ford truck. This was around 3:30 p.m. on the afternoon of her disappearance. This truck was said to be near Sarah's school and driven by a male in his 30s. He also had dark brown hair and a pencil mustache. Now, the only thing I would say is this story kind of doesn't make sense with the story of her friends, where they said that they had planned to skip school that day. Sarah didn't attend classes all that day. So either she was picked up by someone in the morning after she was dropped off, and then they were just driving around that area, and that's how she was seen around 3:30. But you'd think if someone had the intention of abducting her, they would have picked her up and then immediately left the area. So the sighting, I don't know. I question things about it. And this witness also claimed that Sarah didn't seem upset or like she was trying to get out of the truck. Another witness would come forward saying that they had seen Sarah at a payphone in Cato Mills, Texas, after her disappearance. Louise's neighbors allegedly said that they spotted Sarah in a car in Quinlan, Texas, and were positive that it was Sarah. Now, I'd think that the neighbors would definitely know what Sarah looked like, so I could see their sighting being more plausible than, I don't know who this other original witness was that seen Sarah in a vehicle at 3:30 p.m. Sarah's friends would also provide more information from the day of her disappearance, allegedly saying that she had planned to meet up with Curtis. Her diary also confirmed that she wanted to run away. In it, she had written that she wanted to marry Curtis, and wrote in her diary that her and Curtis would run away to Mexico if her parents did not allow them to be together. Now, Curtis would admit that him and Sarah had spoken about wanting to run away. However, he claimed they weren't actually serious. And according to Louise, her daughter did not have a history of running away, and she hadn't packed anything before she had left for school. She didn't pack a bag to run away. Her clothing, her purse, all of her belongings remained at home. Over the following weeks, authorities received multiple tips and sightings regarding Sarah. One, however, did stand out. A gas station clerk would end up contacting authorities after they seen a missing persons flyer with Sarah's face on it. And they recognized Sarah on this missing persons flyer. And so authorities went and they were able to review the gas station's surveillance video. And in that footage, Sarah can be seen with Curtis. And when he was tracked down, he denied being with Sarah that day, saying that it was a completely different girl. When later asked by authorities, he then denied that he was even the person in that footage. A week after Sarah's disappearance on May 7th, Curtis would be arrested and charged with aggravated essay of a child. But it wasn't for Sarah, it was for an entirely different teenage girl. And while investigating Sarah's disappearance, they discovered that he had been sexually involved with her. And I describe it like that because it allegedly was consensual, even though Sarah wasn't of legal age to consent. So technically it was SA. Technically, legally, SA. In 2005, the Montel Williams Show interviewed Louise and John for a segment of their show. This episode would be watched by local firemen who recalled picking up a girl who had been walking down the road with 5 bags. He claimed that she had told him that her name was Sarah, but she wasn't very talkative. His wife would end up calling Louise to report the information and would set up a meeting to meet this girl named Sarah. However, after meeting with the girl, Louise determined that it was not her daughter. Her teeth were too straight and the nose wasn't the same. The couple would ask Louise if she was sure multiple times. They wanted this case to be solved as well, but Louise was sure. Over the years, special birthday ads would be placed for Sarah on the missing persons boards at Walmart. Her family would hold balloon releases and would begin spreading the word over Facebook when the internet became more popular. And when it comes to sightings regarding Sarah, there have been many. Sarah has possibly been seen in Tualatin, Beaverton, Tigard, and the Portland areas of Oregon as early as 2004, and may have also been spotted in Surrey, British Columbia in late 2004. She was reported to have cut her hair short and dyed it brown. And in all that time that passed, life moved on. Louise wondered, is Sarah married? Did she have her own babies? On Sarah's 20th birthday, her mother baked her favorite strawberry cake. If she had been there, they would have sang happy birthday to her, taken pictures, let her blow out her own candles, have the first slice of cake, and chose the ice cream that she wanted. But since she was missing, the only gift her family was able to give her was to buy a newspaper ad with her picture and her birthday wish for her. 9 years after Sarah's disappearance, her family would receive an anonymous letter in their mailbox. Louise described the letter, saying, quote, "It didn't say who it was from. In essence, it told us to speak to a specific individual. The note said if we did, I believe you will find the answers you were looking for." End quote. That specific individual turned out to be Curtis's best friend's ex-wife. Upon speaking to the ex-wife, however, she apparently claimed to know nothing about the case. Eventually, the Kinslow family would figure out the writer of that anonymous letter, and apparently it was an individual who Louise had urged to speak up. This unnamed male would later say that he had heard that Sarah had been killed, and her body had been disposed in a rocky quarry that was full of water. Louise would beg authorities to search that area in 2012. However, it's unclear if anything ever came of that lead. After this information, Louise began to say that she did not believe that her daughter was alive anymore. Years later, Curtis would plead guilty to assaulting a child in July of 2009. He would receive a sentence of 20 days behind bars, as well as a decade of deferred adjudication probation. But to this day, Sarah has still not been found, and her family is still waiting for answers. Her family is still waiting for justice. And to me, it seems there is still a predator walking their streets. So let's take one more good look at Sarah. Maybe it'll spark a memory. Sarah is described as standing 5 foot 4 inches tall and weighing around 105 pounds. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. Sarah was last seen wearing blue jeans, a teal hooded jacket, and gray and blue sneakers. She also had a tattoo of the letter I on her ankle and 2 chickenpox scars on her left cheek. If you have any information as to what may have happened to either Sarah or Heather, please contact the authorities. I'll have the information for both cases linked down below. I'm also wondering if you have any other information on either of these cases that I didn't find or speak about here today. I'll be in the comment section chatting with you all. As always, my heart goes out to both of these families. I truly hope answers do come. We have 2 young girls here who disappeared without a trace and are still missing till this day. They need to be found and they need to be brought home. As always, make sure to lock your doors and windows, and I hope to see you in the next video.